Hello, citizens of the galaxy. Welcome to another episode of the Jedi Way here on the Outlaw Nation show. I am one of your co-hosts. I am the Outlaw John Rocha, joined as always by the lovely Laura Kelly. How are you, Laura? How are things going there in Chicago?
Things are good. Things are snowy. We just got a lot of snow.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's snowy and dreary, and it's a typical Chicago winter. What can I say?
Is it dragging on longer than usual? Is it usually done by now, or this is pretty
Oh
standard?
no. Oh no, sir. We are just getting started. No, winter in Chicago will last well through April. It will be cold well through April. It'll snow many more times between now and probably mid-March. So yeah, it's
Wow.
we're in it for the long haul here.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's well, I was telling you off camera how we came. There's apparently some winter storms happening here in California, and I came out in San Diego. Came out, and there was like a stack of snow on my car, which was a surprise. But for this East Coast boy, it made me smile. I haven't seen snow in forever. So I know for people like you probably like you're okay with it occasionally, but it's too much there in Chicago. Is that true or no?
Occasionally, it is too much. I will say that. But yeah, no, it's going okay here for now. This is sort of our first really big snow. I think there's probably like 6 or 7 inches out there now.
Wow. Wow.
But
Okay.
yeah, we're all cooped up inside anyway. So what can you
Yes.
do?
Good point. More excuse to stay in, hopefully. And we're today we're going to talk about inclusivity in the Star Wars universe. This is something that came up because of something that's been happening this week with Krystina Arielle and what happened with the reaction to her being named as the host of one of the co-hosts rather of the High Republic show that's coming from Star Wars. There was a reaction. Some people had found some old tweets of hers and were trying to paint her in a certain way, and we felt that was a way for us to address it in what our show is about, our style of show, to explore inclusivity in Star Wars in a positive way. Try to find the moments and beats where it's happened in a positive way, and see the journey of inclusivity in Star Wars from the original trilogy all the way up to the Mandalorian, and see what's happening there as a response to some of this reaction. And Laura, before we bring on our guest, we do have a guest who's going to be joining us here in just a second. What was your initial reaction when you saw some of the things that were being said, and the fact that Star Wars stood up and said we stand with Krystina on Twitter?
Well, in terms of what was initially being said about Christina, unfortunately, I was not surprised.
Mm,
At this point, it's just become rote for a certain subsection of Star Wars fans who are, I think, a minority, but are very loud
yeah.
to be speaking out and to just suddenly be, harassing someone for no good reason. So unfortunately for me, that was expected. That's really kind of become part of the drill here. In terms
Yeah.
of Star Wars speaking out, I have to say I was kind of surprised that this was sort of the time that they decided to finally speak out. I find it really disappointing that there wasn't that kind of support for John Boyega, for Kelly Marie Tran.
Yeah.
Things were happening about them, so it feels a little bit too late for me. It's
Mm,
a little too late. I'm glad that they said something. Something needed to be said. It needed to come from them.
right.
But yeah, and I don't want to discourage them from doing it again. But at this
Mhm.
point, it's like you couldn't have. You don't think you maybe should have said something when that article, that GQ article with John Bull.
Right. Right. Yeah, you wonder, Laura, where they pick and choose the moments to make a stand. Maybe they sense, look, the Black Lives Matter movement is something we should have paid a little harder attention to. The Me Too movement, now all the stuff that's happening now as a result, this is now about brand saving. This is now about face saving, and trying to honor it more as we go forward. And certainly we've seen with Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni what they've done with The Mandalorian and bringing in people of color, women to direct the episodes of the franchise, Deborah Chow being handed Kenobi. Sort of the steps are being made towards this direction, but you're right to call them out and say, hey, where were you when all this other stuff was just like literally a year or two ago? Where were you when all of this was going down? So it's a fair point to bring up. And as we were doing research for the show, I stumbled upon an article by a friend of mine and someone whose work I've enjoyed reading over the years, and someone I enjoyed meeting through the Schmodown randomly. You meet so many incredible, talented people in the Schmodown. Christian, I don't know what his magic is, but he's brought you in, Laura, me in, and this person we're about to meet now. Her name is Sabrina Graves. She's a filmmaker, journalist. You might have seen her on Collider, as I mentioned, the Schmodown, and I've read her stuff on comingsoon.net as well. And she's got a new podcast called Halloween Never Dies, but she wrote about diversity in Star Wars for fandom a couple of years ago, and she's been one of these people that speaks out about inclusivity and representation, and I thought she'd be a great addition to this conversation. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sabrina Graves to the Jedi Way. Sabrina, how are you?
Hey, John. Hey, Kelly. I'm sorry, Laura. I'm doing really well. I mean, considering pandemic and the pandemic of it. No, thank you for having me on. And that was an article I wrote a couple years ago, like you said, that I was really proud of. And for it to still be circling right now means a lot. So thank you.
No, absolutely. What was I'm sure you kept tabs on this Krystina Arielle situation. So let's ask you about it here. What was your reaction as you were saying? Did you echo Laura's sentiments that you weren't surprised but by the reaction, but you might have been a little bit surprised that Star Wars felt the need to go on their own official Twitter account and defend her and say that they stand with her?
No, for sure. I think that, with this situation specifically, I do have a personal relationship with Krystina. She and I are friends through the filmmaking world, actually. So I helped Cheyenne, one of our mutual friends, with her first horror short, and Krystina was the lead in that. So I got to spend a whole day with her, and she is nothing but a sweetheart. And so to see those inflammatory tweets pop up and how they kind of painted her in a specific light, that was not at all her intention of what she was fighting and trying to represent. Was very disappointing, but not surprising. I agree with Laura. It's not surprising at all that this group of the fandom pops out to be loud and kind of reiterate some things that, it's crazy to me, because this story that we love, it kind of talks about sort of toxic cultish behavior that tries to override hope and stuff. And it's so I don't understand to this day. It's you're the baddies in this case,
Right.
And it's such a bummer, but for Star Wars to make a statement, I was actually listening to a podcast, Part of America, which is completely unrelated, but it is actually kind of related. But
you cut off a little bit there. Sorry, Sabina, you cut out a little bit there. Which podcast was it? Which podcast?
Dolly Parton's America.
Oh, wow. Okay, all right.
I mean, seems unrelated, but it is kind of related. There is a lot of topic in there about people who are part of a fandom, specifically like Dolly Parton, who come from different walks of life, and really, seeing the art as a unifier, and how throughout time there are constant dialogues about this fandom that we love and these stories that we love that generally tend to just continue that dialogue about conflict, as opposed to finding that common ground, and as opposed to finding that resolution to make people feel valid and represented. And I think that Star Wars actually now making that effort to do that is really amazing, but there's still a lot of areas where that needs work.
Yeah. And Laura, this must be perplexing, right? I mean, the whole universe is about acceptance and people banding together to fight against this kind of uniformish evil that seeks to make everybody assimilate into a collective and act a certain way and be under their foot. We've seen the Rebel Alliance full of multiple species, different nowadays, people of different colors, different genders, all of that involved. So it seems odd that there's this angry side of the toxicity side of Star Wars that goes after people of color, and specifically women of color, harder when they come to represent Star Wars.
Yeah, and I think Sabina made a really good point in that, do you all not realize the irony that you are the bad guys? You are the bad guys in this story. I don't understand what what mindset could you be coming from where you don't believe and don't buy into the fact that people of color deserve a place at the fandom table, and women and queer people deserve a place at the table when it comes to this fandom, especially Star Wars? I'm like, it's all about, trying to the Empire trying to take down the little guy and the little guy fighting back. Like, you don't see that? Like, you guys are, I mean, I just not buying it. It's weird.
No, it's so weird. Like, this universe is so big. I personally definitely a big person on like the cinematic side of it. But to my understanding, in the old universe, and even some side projects, I have friends who like dig deep into the lore, and from what they have like explained to me enthusiastically and through their love of Star Wars, I've come to understand that it's always pretty much been diverse, like in the old books and in the games and in some of the like TV content that's happened. So for them to claim this whole like we are the end all be all of this fandom and anything that we don't agree with is wrong is like you fundamentally don't seem to have an understanding of this thing that you love that has always been inclusive.
It seems confusing because there is this desire to say, "Oh, you're shoehorning women in, you're shoehorning," and it's the same kind of discussions with people say it's not the right time to talk about this, but it never seems to be the right time to talk about this, and it never seems to be the right character. It never seems to be the right time to add a woman of color or a woman, period, into the lead of us. It never seems to be the right time. There's always the rebellion, and they paint it in a way that seems like, well, they're forcing it, the square peg into the round hole. But nothing could be further from the truth. And that's the thing that I think gets frustrating as we see how many examples there are of so many positive female characters, positive characters of color that have come into the Star Wars universe, Laura. Which, I mean, Ahsoka Tano is the one that got you kind of into the whole world of Star Wars. So that's your, I don't know, that's like your spirit animal in a way in this franchise, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and like I sort of became like a fan of Ahsoka through Rebels before I even got into the Clone Wars. But like when I went back and sort of got into the Clone Wars after that and learned sort of the history of this character and learned, got into some of the history of Ashley Eckstein's experience as a Star Wars fan, it was really eye-opening because at that point, when I come into Star Wars as a Rebels fan, it's already very inclusive and very diverse, that part of the fandom, I think. And to go back and see how angry people were, and learn, how hurtful that was for Ashley Eckstein as the voice actress of Ahsoka Tano to be facing that sort of criticism of, who Ahsoka was as a character and what she was bringing to the Clone Wars was really, I mean, that was so sad. It made me sad for that. I mean, I know that was like 2008. I think that, that most of that was probably going on, but it's just, that number's very recent in my head. I know it was over 10 years ago, but that's too recent for that kind of bullshit to be going on.
Yeah. And look, well, we'll go back to, and we know about what happened, and I'm sure some of you watching, if you need a little bit of a refresher, Daisy Ridley was essentially bullied off of social media because of people's reaction to her being the lead actress in the Star Wars universe. And then, of course, what happened to Kelly Marie Tran as well. And that was really devastating because this is a young woman who really had no idea that this was going to happen to her in her life. Like she was here in California. She was doing improv. She was acting. She was auditioning. She was working on her career, working on her craft. And then this opportunity came to her. She auditioned for it. She booked it. And that section of the fandom took what could have been a really enjoyable, positive, life-affirming, life-changing moment, and did make it life-changing in a negative way because she essentially had to get off the social media and everything. And she wrote about it in a magazine and spoke about it in a column, how it really kind of destroyed the experience for her. And it reaffirmed what many performers, I would argue 95% performers say to themselves at 3 a.m., I'm not good enough. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm not. And people reaffirming that in such a loud voice, not understanding the power they had, or maybe or maybe understanding the power they had to hurt people wielding it with such force. I find that to be so destructive. You know, Boyega, as tough as they came for Boyega, he seemed to be able to handle it. Was it tough at times? Was it over? Did it make him angry? Yes, but he seemed to be like, bring it. Whereas they ushered off and essentially bullied Kelly Marie Tran and Daisy Ridley off the social media. I don't understand what the goal is in the end. You know, I don't understand what the point is of doing that. We need voices. You know, if we look at the history of Star Wars, we talk about, and we should get into that. We talk about the original trilogy. Leia is literally the co-lead of that trilogy with Luke. You know, the journey. It is Luke's journey, yes, but the Leia and Han situation is there. Leia leading the troops, Leia being the general. So it's surprising that another woman being made essentially to be the lead of a new trilogy would have been received with such vitriol from the fans.
Definitely. and it's crazy to me because like it's such a bummer to see the exhaustion and toll that it's taken on performers that we're excited about, from Oscar Isaac to John Boyega to Kelly Marie Tran, even like Hayden Christensen. And you kind of like, is it really necessary to just be that extreme on someone who, you know, for better, I mean, like, who is a part of this universe? They're a part of this story, and it just seems so unfair, you know. And you have like Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill who have in many ways taken stances that are very, you know, like if it was Kelly Marie Tran or John Boyega like saying these things, that specific like grouping of the fandom will go harder against a person of color than, you know, those iconic heroes. And like I enjoyed and like was inspired by Mark Hamill's past 4 years on Twitter. In many ways, you know, like
wielding it powerfully for sure.
But I never saw them go after him in that way. So you kind of see that discrepancy there, and it kind of just goes to show that, you know, we need to go we need to figure out a way to improve that part of the community.
Laura, thoughts on that?
One of the lines that Kelly Marie Tran wrote in her op-ed for the New York Times is that the words reinforced a narrative that I had heard my whole life, that I was other, that I didn't belong, and that I wasn't good enough simply because I didn't look like them. And I remember reading this when it first came out, and that like really struck me because it brought the situation to light in a different way for me. And I kind of remember thinking of it like this. When I was 12 years old and my favorite band started to get really popular, I was like really annoyed with that because I was really into Good Charlotte first. And now all of you people are into Good Charlotte and you're all just posers. But the thing is I was 12 years old and my brain wasn't fully developed because I was just a young, dumb idiot. And the fact that there are like full grown adults that still seem to have this sort of attitude of, well, these people don't look like me, think like me, pray like me. And that would cause such a divide still in literally adults. I mean, it blows my mind to that extent. I cannot fathom how we're still having this conversation in 2020, 2019, whenever all this was going on. It's just mind blowing.
Agreed. Well, let's divert into this into what we were going to go into, and that is the journey of inclusivity in Star Wars here, starting from the original trilogy all the way to Mandalorian. If you look at the original trilogy, as I mentioned, we have Leia, we also have Lando Calrissian, Billy
Lando.
Lando is not played as, you know, as some of the, and remember, this is the 70s. Now, for some of you who may need a little bit of history, like this is African-American characters at times during some of these films were played in certain ways. Watch French Connection and watch how some of the African-American characters or the black characters are treated in some of these classic films in the 70s. Some of the words that are uttered, even in The Godfather, like we're doing The Godfather right now in Cinephiles, one of the words by one of the Italian dons, how he describes black people. Like, this is the approach. You had black exploitation, which is trying to, take control of that, take control of the narrative a little bit. But then you have Billy D, who kind of came out of those movies like that, and you saw him in Ladies Sing the Blues, you saw him Bingo Long and the Traveling All Stars, and he steps into this role of Lando Calrissian, and he doesn't play him to the stereotype. It's not even a mention of his race. He's played so powerfully, so strong, and yes, he's in charge of a city, and like he's not played as a lower character or a lower job. He's in charge of the city. Does he, kind of betray Han? Yes, but because what would you do if Darth Vader showed up on your doorstep? So I just think it was such a powerful representation to go along in the second movie to bring him into this. Sabina, what did you think about Lando's contribution to the world of inclusivity here in Star Wars?
Lando is such a big example of like a character that both the actor and the audience embraced in a way. And like, back in like the 80s, 90s and like early aughts and stuff, to even like suggest to like Harrison Ford, for example, coming back to like the role of Han Solo was rebuffed because, with like that superstardom comes with like a bit of like obligation to maybe be like, I'm moving forward toward these other things I'm doing, and understandably for that time. But you have Billy D. Williams, who never who was always engaging with the fandom, always at conventions, always like game. And, I think that's so unfortunate that, now we have like a huge family of like actors like Diego Luna, and we have it could just like list off everyone.
Yeah, Oscar Isaac.
Oscar Isaac, and
so many.
Half the cast of Rogue One, most of the cast of Rogue One, who are so
Riz Ahmed,
Riz Ahmed, and like who are now part of this, and it's like, why just bring that energy down when we could just be having so much fun and celebrating all these characters that we can extend ourselves. Like, that's a really big thing where it's like, I'm Latinx, and I grew up extending myself and saw myself reflected in Princess Leia in many ways. And I feel like if, it could be, it's reciprocal.
Yeah. What about you, Laura? I mean, like, I know you, like you said, you came into the Star Wars universe a little bit later in life, Ahsoka being your entry point. When you go back now, kind of, do you have a different experience of going back to watch the original trilogies? Is there a connection with Leia? Do you feel that power of Leia being this like strong, independent woman in representation? Considering the time in the 70s, the ERA movement was happening. Women were burning their bras. They were marching for equality there. She kind of came out of that. And Leia, or Carrie Fisher rather, rewrote a lot of her lines because of how George Lucas had kind of dropped the ball writing for her a little bit in those films, rather.
George Lucas dropping the ball with dialogue. Who could imagine? I know, would never know. No, I mean, Leia was that a little bit, but it was one of those things where I think if you could take the time period totally out of it, and Leia would still be a really badass character. So when I came into it and I was watching, went back and started watching the original trilogy, I was sort of surprised because I was surprised how big of a role she played, because my sort of general knowledge of like the just what you get in pop culture, your general knowledge of Star Wars, having not seen it up until that point, was that it was very male driven. And I sort of had always interpreted Princess Leia as not being really a main character. So I was surprised how big her role was when I finally sat down and watched the films for the first time, and how, it wasn't really the guys coming in and saving her. A lot of it was her saving them on the Death Star. And I found that really enlightening and really, something to take a lot of joy in. And I think that was, I'm sure it was rather surprising for the time period, but even now I took a lot of joy in it.
Yeah, I was reading an essay in preparation for the show. I wish I could remember the gentleman who wrote it, but he was talking. It's a collection of essays, and spoke about how when you watch the Star Wars trilogies, it's really fascinating to see how they start. When you start in usually busy cities. They don't have to be metropolitan cities, but they're busy cities full of multiple species, people of color. You see in the streets, they're walking in the cantina scene, all the different species in the cantina scene. And it's these brown, earthy colors, which represent, in essence, unity, equality, multiple genders and species, all of that involved. And then as it goes along, as the evil starts to consume more and more of it, it becomes more uniform into one color, one way of thinking. That's the hint there that is actually not the right way to be in life. And so it's interesting to follow the color palette as well when you talk about inclusivity, because it seems initially very inclusive, and what they're fighting against is an entity that's trying to remove that inclusivity and make everybody uniform in a certain way. So it's fascinating to see it repeated again in the prequel trilogies as well, starting on Naboo and then moving there as we go into the cities. But then as Palpatine and Darth Vader, by the end, it's all this black and darkness and only one color controlling everything. It's all of that as well. But Laura, with the prequels, we have more diversity in the prequels, right? It seems like George heard what was happening, maybe read some of the articles and responses to the original trilogy, and tried to include more people of color, tried to include more species. And yeah, I mean, you can say he dropped the ball with Jar Jar Binks a little bit, dropped the ball with the Federation, the Trade Federation. That sounds a little bit like they're Chinese or Asian, rather, not Chinese, sorry, Asian. And then, of course, with Watto, there's been that. But at least there was an attempt here to bring more voices, to bring more accents, to bring more representation of places from different regions into this galaxy.
Yeah, we definitely got a little bit more. There was more color for sure. And I love that we sort of brought in, even just bringing in different aliens of different species into the mix was sort of, it was this great way of just bringing a little bit of, color and diversity into what could have been a sort of more monochromatic trilogy. But yeah, bringing in Jimmy Smits, bringing in, bringing in Bail Organa, or always a favorite. Making Padme Amidala this young queen, this very powerful character, and making her like her closest bodyguards all women. That was, that was a great step that I really appreciated when I finally sat down and watched the prequels too.
Yeah, Sabina, and most of the time, just like the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, except for maybe General Grievous, it is all what seems to all white males who are trying to control the universe and make it all seem a certain way. And it fascinates me that people seem to kind of miss that whole concept when they're looking at these trilogies as a whole.
Oh no, for sure. It's crazy because obviously you could say that you can interpret the Empire as very much Nazi-esque, inspired by that time. The First Order definitely reminds me of the stuff that's going on right now. And you have this, like, I really love that you said that, like these unifying these cities that we see in these landscapes being so inclusive. And I honestly do believe that George Lucas, when he was overseeing the old canon and stuff, definitely included that in those stories. And when he got the chance to bring that to the big screen, that's probably part of why a lot of those choices were misguided as well, because he's like, well, I've like already developed this world where it's like, everyone, and then certain tropes still made its way in. And, like, I think that it's great for creators to go back and kind of realize like these choices and how they affect those who want more representation. But, like even like the theme park world is also very inclusive, and it's fun to like go to and be interactive with.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the time we're at when these the prequel trilogy comes out, right? It's the late 90s into the early 2000s, and this is when people are becoming more aware as we're turning the corner of having these conversations in a more frequent way. This idea of representation, this idea of racism, right? Coming out of the 90s, which we saw, Spike Lee coming into his own. So many filmmakers coming into their own to speak. Female filmmakers, especially on the independent movement side of things during the 90s, coming out to speak about these issues, even in some populist way, like Drew Barrymore. Was it Bad Girls, the cowboy one, where they were all in the West and they were all trying to kick ass as female cowboys? Like there were these pushes. G.I. Jane as well with the Demi Moore. There was this push to have more conversations, right?
I mean, like I think Gina Davis, for example, talked about it a lot and has her, her program about gender studies and equality on screen. I mean, like we had her be the lead of so many films in the early 90s, like kind of like delved into that sort of subject, like League of Their Own. And she was the lead in Cronenberg's The Fly and Beetlejuice. And specifically, I want to like look back on A Long Kiss Goodnight, which should have been like her trajectory into like a really dope action star. Like that movie is amazing. I've seen a resurgence of it on Twitter, which I love. A lot of use of her ending like lines to describe die screaming to certain figures. But yeah, like you have these steps forward and then these steps back. And I think definitely in the age of the internet, we have more visibility and accountability for these things that almost happened and then for whatever reason didn't. And, you know, kind of now being able to call a lot of that into question. And, you know, I think a lot of, there's a lot of like bashing of critics, I think at times we're like pointing some stuff out, but I think it gets lost in the mix that a lot of us will be critical because we love the thing that we're all talking about. We just want it to make it better and want it to reflect everyone and not erase, like it does not erase what came before. It's still there to enjoy and love and honor.
And Laura, again, in this prequel trilogy, we get more people involved, more species coming together. I mean, sitting on the Jedi Council, there's all those different species represented. These are attempts at inclusion. Are they clumsy? Do they 100% not get there? No, but they're at least attempts, and there's validity in that. Once again, it is, in essence, an evil white male in Palpatine who's trying to manipulate and control the Senate, control everything to, in essence, get himself into a position of power to control things. So, I mean, George is saying what the issue is. All these species come together to defeat someone trying to make everybody conform to one way of thinking.
Yeah, and I think, you know, George Lucas really he seemed to really put an effort into that aspect of filmmaking in the prequels, which is great. I have heard there was one criticism that I've read that I found is interesting, and that's in taking people of color and covering them in like all of the alien makeup and having them play like the other species in Star Wars, which I think is a fair criticism.
Oh yeah.
People of color want to see themselves represented on screen. I fully understand that. So I do think that is, you know, one of those things that we look at the prequels now and can sort of understand where we need to where we have areas where we need to improve.
There's a really big thing that happens in that sort of regard where a lot of people of color will either be covered in makeup or have characters based on people of color. And it's so crazy because it's that, or they're also just a side character, or they're the main lead as a bad guy, but we haven't had enough stories of them as like the hero lead that's centered on them to kind of, you know, like there's like still a conversation there where it's like, that's not entirely inclusion. It is inclusion, but it's not a balancing of stories, because you've had, you know, the entirety of the age of cinema be centered around one narrative. We have yet to have as many stories that center on other perspectives of women, people of color, LGBTQ leads to balance out when there is like a bad guy who is, you know, LGBTQ, or if there's a bad guy that is like of color, but it's like finding that middle ground still is where we're at for sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I want to make clear. What we're talking about is the journey of inclusivity that Star Wars has. We're not excusing the mistakes, not excusing where they've maybe fallen down at the finish line, before the finish line, or not getting it right. It's more a matter of seeing the efforts that were being made as we've gone along, and then we get to the Clone Wars, Laura, and then we get an explosion of characters of multiple species, multiple genders, becoming central to the storylines, having their own character arcs, having their own multi-episode arcs, and what have you. With Ahsoka, with Asajj Ventress, with so many different characters, this must be a place that Star Wars realized, okay, with all the criticism over Jar Jar, the criticism over the Federation, the criticism of Watto, we need to do a better job of representing what we've got. I mean, you had Mace Windu in the prequel trilogy as well, so you certainly had that. Like you said, Bail Organa. There was more here,
and it was so cool to see Jamie Smith and Samuel Jackson in this universe.
Yeah, absolutely. So you want to do something with those characters, and Clone Wars, I feel like, was the first really big, huge step forward where they understood how to represent and how to strive for better representation for these characters of color.
Yeah, and we're bringing in, I think, the really early age of social media at that time, and whether or not that had an effect on it or not, I don't know. But the fact that we had more diverse voice casts working on those films, and we heard lots of different accents in that show from these different characters and different aliens, humanoid or otherwise, from across the galaxy. It definitely brought a lot of color to the show. It made it really interesting, and there was. That show was always very visually striking, in the way that the characters are designed and the way that they're animated. There's still such a strong enthusiasm for that. But I don't know if it gets enough credit for what it did for bringing more diverse voices to the Star Wars universe.
Was there an experience with you watching Clone Wars where you were like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of it from that perspective, or haven't thought of it from that point of view as you were watching Clone Wars that you can recall when you watched it at the time that you experienced it?
At the time, I remember being very surprised when I sort of heard, I want to say it was probably Dave Filoni talking about how the point of the show was sort of watching the Clone Wars through Ahsoka Tano's eyes. And I hadn't really interpreted it that way until he mentioned that. And it sort of changed how I watched the show at the time and how I sort of appreciated the interpretation of characters like Anakin, who's a very different interpretation than he is in the prequel films. Right. So I think that realization is what sort of it kind of opened my eyes a little bit to watch the show and is sort of different from a different perspective.
Yeah, it's a female perspective, which it's it would carry on as we go into the sequel trilogy. But before we leave Clone Wars, I mean, what was your reaction, Sabina, as you were watching this, seeing so many more characters of color? Was animated a place where they could try this out? Maybe they felt, and it would be seen in mass at the same numbers that their movies were, and they thought, well, let's work this out, let's explore this, let's have some fun with this, let's see what we can create in a more inclusive world of Star Wars.
Yeah, I like to think of that specific era in animation as a point where many animated shows kind of like threw amazing, talented voices like confetti up in the air and put them in various different roles. Yeah. Because like specifically with Ahsoka, you have her design definitely has been identified by Black women as very much looking like a Black woman. Yeah. Which definitely came up recently with Rosario Dawson taking over the character as a big part of conversation. And I think, that like really challenging sort of topic because, Ashley Eckstein we owe Ahsoka just to her in so many ways. And she is like such a class act for, how she handled that transition into having Rosario Dawson take over the world, because I feel like it acknowledged that, truth of the character design and bringing to the screen a more accurate portrayal. Yeah. In a way that pays respects to everybody. And, we went through phases of diversity, and I'm sure, John, you are very well aware of, how it was in the 90s and then how it was in the aughts. And true. Let's give, because, even, I think at the time that,
70s, the 80s, I can tell you all about.
Ashley Eckstein took the role of Ahsoka. That was when How to Train Your Dragon, I think, was starting, and America Ferrera was playing, a Viking. So it's Viking. Throw them up in the air, and, so we're now being accountable for those choices, and we tried this, and maybe it does not translate well to the real life, and what do we do, right. And to see the Ahsoka fans really kind of embrace that, and then kind of we all obviously so crushed a little bit about Ashley not taking over the role, but just like that's the beauty of like through challenges we learn and we like unite. So that for the Clone Wars era, like I think about that a lot specifically, and then like to have those voices also still come back, and from the prequels into the Clone Wars era to like have Tamora Morrison and like different people jump in and out of like their characters and revisit, and it's incredible.
That's another thing. Yeah, Tamora Morrison was also introduced in the prequels as well. Yet another. I mean, that they're essentially saying that this person of color, this gentleman, was responsible for the clones, for Jango, for all of these, the clone troopers, everything. It's just, there we go. Here's another person of color, more diversity. So listen, as I said, you can knock them for not having done it quicker. You can knock the studio, knock Star Wars for not having been more about it from the beginning, a step ahead of it. But the fact that they're trying when their opportunities come up, they're trying at larger amounts to include more people of color and more women into the projects. I think,
and Afro-Latinx. I'm sorry.
Sorry,
I meant to correct myself. I was referring, obviously, like the design of Ahsoka as a Black woman, but casting an Afro-Latinx actress is amazing. And not to like see. We're constantly like, we have to make sure to be accountable for these different changes that happen.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing. Criticism is okay, but also take the time to recognize there are efforts being made here, and they're trying to figure it out as they go along what works. And Laura, we go now into Star Wars Rebels, which really has Sabine, Hera. You've got so many people represented throughout. Of course, you've got Ezra as well, who's drawn. I don't know. I've always felt Ezra. What was your feeling about Ezra? Do you have an idea of what race he was representing? Because it didn't
very ambiguous,
right? It didn't seem to be like a straight white character. It seems like they were taking a chance here. What did you think?
Well, he's played by a white voice actor, but he always sort of struck me as sort of supposed to be like a Middle Eastern descent. I think certainly when we saw what his parents look like, I think that's even sort of further drove that home.
Right.
But I mean, I think they really knocked it out of the park with Sabine in particular, especially in the later seasons when they had to cast her entire family, and they put the effort into cast people of Asian descent to play her brother, play her mom, and play her dad. And I think that was an important step to take that, not just take this character and not just bring in these other characters and whitewash them in any way. They specifically designed Sabine to look a certain way. They cast the voice actress that sort of matched that. And maybe they had Tia Sakara in mind first, because she really I really do think that Tia Sakara could actually play a live action scene.
For sure. And we saw her on The Good Place, and she was so good.
Yeah.
She was one of the evil sort of like bad place like leaders. She almost overthrew the main character.
I remember her in The Internship, the terrible, well, not terrible, the kind of okay Vince Vaughn Owen Wilson movie. So I love Tia. I think she'd be great to do a live action version of Sabine if they get to that point. But once again, right, it is a multicultural group of people coming together to try to fight, the Empire and try to get out from under them and Ahsoka Tano makes appearances. We have David Oyelowo voicing that character, right? And his twist and turn and what have you. So even bringing Thrawn in, that is a person of color. Yes, it's blue, but it's still a person of color. Having the more and more diversity of these species coming through in Rebels for me was so crazy enjoyable. As someone who's been living with the Star Wars franchise since its birth, I really get angry when people not angry, but I really get upset when people don't give it the credit for the attempts that it is making. It is growing itself. So you have, point out the criticisms, but also give it some love for the attempts that it's making. And I feel like Rebels really did that all over that series.
And it makes me wonder if during the process of Rebels, they started realizing that, like, wait, we might want to visit these characters in live action, and we're like, we should probably keep that in mind in casting, Because at that point, obviously Clone Wars already happened and stuff, so they, were mindful of, like, if we bring these characters to life on the big screen, we want to be respectful to the cultures that they are, representative of in a way. So it's interesting because like you said, I could see so many of these actors be that role. I know there's talk about one of the leads from Haunting of Hill House, Blind Manor, Rahul Kohli. He was like everyone was on Twitter is like he's the fan favorite to be Ezra if Ezra shows up, which is so fun.
Yeah, I think you've tweeted about that, Laura, haven't you?
Yeah, I would really love that actually.
Yeah.
If that ends up being the case. I think he's sort of over it. I saw that he blocked the words Ezra Bridger on his social media, which I'm like, no, keep talking about it because it's awesome and I just need it to happen. But he's clearly a big Star Wars fan, and that would just be mind-blowing to have that actually come true.
Well, and now let's get into the sequel trilogy. The sequel trilogy, boom, right off the bat. Daisy Ridley is the lead, an English actress who had 6 guest spots to her name as an actress in British TV shows, and somehow lands the lead of this massive franchise and this rebirth of this franchise. And she is joined by John Boyega as a Black Stormtrooper, which I was so excited about. And Oscar Isaac as a Latino, a Latinx, whatever I don't know the denomination. I'm so old. I don't know the denomination. I just know I'm Latino. That's what I know. But seeing Oscar step into it, I was just so excited. I'm like, this is great. This is great. And we're going to bring back Luke. We're going to bring back Han and Leia. That's all cool. But the new generation or the new iteration reflects what our society is, a more inclusive society. And yet you got to be honest, they kind of dropped the ball. Yeah, Sabina, take this. They dropped the ball, right?
Oh man, I mean, I feel like they honestly did most of the new core group so dirty, and it makes me so sad because one of the things I really loved about the original franchise is that the main characters would often be separated and then come back together, but there was always they were always either 2 together and then 1 off or whatever. So you'd still get the dynamics of that core group to become endeared with and love. And I felt like that was definitely lacking in this series. And it was to the detriment of their character development in so many ways, I love Kelly Marie Tran, and I wish they had introduced her character earlier and to make it feel less we were introduced to Poe, Finn, and Rey in the first one, and then in the second one, they're all in these other places, not together, so we don't really get that build up, but we're also waiting on seeing the legacy characters that we're also excited for. It was overwhelming in so many ways because how are you going to keep everybody happy? And that was what ultimately was the downfall of this series, and just the build up of having Finn seem force sensitive and then kind of abandoning that in a way, at least publicly, because I don't know if y'all have seen the holiday special, Rey is training Finn in the force. So he is still canonly a force sensitive person that, we should have seen that come back and pay off in a better way, because there are so many just fans that wanted to see that represented, so it's so important. And then same thing with Oscar Isaac, kind of he delved into some murky waters with some, I would say, problematic and slightly misogynistic sort of stances. I love The Last Jedi, but I'm sorry, but also not sorry. But there was still some and I love Laura Dern too, so it was kind of I'm really conflicted right now because I love these characters and I wish that they weren't interacting in this way. So there was a lot, and even things that could have been explored further over more films to kind of pay off as to why maybe at this moment we don't like this character, and then see them arc and stuff would have been awesome. But we did not get that. We got a big greatest hit sort of ending.
Laura, they certainly, and Boyega said that in the GQ interview, they knew how to flesh out Rey, they knew how to flesh out Kylo. Why couldn't they flesh out Finn? Why couldn't they flesh out Poe? Why couldn't they flesh out Rose? Why couldn't they do a little more of the backstory? Why did we get like some flashbacks of Rose and Paige, like what their relationship and as sisters and what have you, joining the Resistance? Why didn't we get more with Finn and his background? We got some kind of Phasma situation here that didn't really bear any fruit. And Poe Dameron, who we learned in the comic books, had a richer history involved with this rebellion. Why wasn't there more explored there? And it seemed like in the animated series, they had multiple episodes to flesh out these arcs, but they seemed to be a little bit hamstrung or not aware of what they really needed to do and the responsibility they had bringing these characters in with multiple ethnicities and both genders. They had a responsibility to these characters to flesh them out more.
Yeah, the long form storytelling, I think, is definitely one of those things that's done Star Wars a lot of favors. And so I agree with a lot of the things that Sabina said about where the shortcomings of the sequel trilogy. As much as I enjoy it or enjoy most of it, I fully acknowledge that everything you're saying is totally spot on. And I think a lot of it starts with the marketing of The Force Awakens, where we had stills of John Boyega holding that lightsaber. And then we had him using it so much in The Force Awakens that it just, it really did set up this thing that we all sort of felt was coming, which was that he was going to be a force sensitive character, and then just completely abandoning that or not really fully committing to it enough. They really kind of just left it hanging at the end of The Force Awakens. It just didn't do that character any favors, unfortunately. And it's really unfortunate that they just didn't let it play out in a way that felt like was the original intention. I don't know.
Yeah, and and I think the point is, look, you've got straight white men in charge of these movies. And look, some of my best friends are straight white men, so I'm not bashing straight white men. I'm just saying, if you put them in charge of these overall franchises, how in tune are they with people of different races, and their history on film, and how being in a position to play these roles, how important it is to flesh out those roles for the communities that they represent. Like Black Panther did that so well for Blacks and African Americans. It did so well. Blacks around the world, rather. Black people around the world. It did so well for that. There are examples here under the Disney umbrella, by the way, of being able to do it. It just seemed like if you've got a predominantly white-led situation, and you don't bring people of color in behind the camera into the writer's room, these are the kind of mistakes that'll be made. And I think as we move into The Mandalorian, Star Wars really learned the lesson here. And yes, you've got two white men in Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, but they've brought in so many people of color and women to tell these stories of The Mandalorian and flesh out these characters.
And there's definitely ways to do it without feeling like, you're checking off boxes box of like, okay, legacy characters, okay, diversity and stuff. Because like going back to different times in history where this has happened, think about like the Addams family, led by Raul Julia. And it wasn't necessarily about being diverse. It was like he was Gomez. And that was one of the first like diversely led films that was genre, that was horror, but somehow managed to become a giant franchise back in the 90s that, unfortunately, due to tragic circumstances of Raul Julia's death, we didn't get to see what that could have like started in the process of these films sort of being like, oh, it's been done. And when I think of like The Mandalorian, I think of like that, of like, it's, we know who Pedro Pascal is, and like are excited about him being in this role, and the Beskar and the spear, although we have like some trauma with him and spears, but yeah, like this, there needs to be a way where it'll be effortless for allies to be able to share in these stories, but also give more of a balance to creatives of color to tell these stories as well, and not just have it be about diversity, but also be about them telling very inclusive stories.
Yeah, I mean, Laurie had the voice of James Earl Jones being the essential main villain in the original trilogy, and obviously with Anakin being what James Earl Jones becomes. But that was an outside voice. You always knew Luke's father was white. It's just that they used James Earl Jones' voice. Now in The Mandalorian, Giancarlo Esposito very much not covered up, not a voice that you hear. He is a black man in charge and the main villain here of the situation against Pedro Pascal, who is of Latino heritage, as the Mandalorian. Gina Carano, that can be a separate conversation, but at least a powerful, strong woman who handles her business and takes care of herself. Doesn't need a man to be helping her on that stuff. You get all these different characters that roll through the Mandalorian. Ming-Na Wen, who's incredible. Tamura coming back. So many people are being involved in these, and it seems like they finally get it. They finally understand how to fully represent these cultures and these communities in a way that's positive. You might have some things to nitpick about, but I feel like they're taking another giant step forward with The Mandalorian, and it might bode well for these future series that are coming from Star Wars as well.
Agreed. And I really do hope that trend continues. With Sabina used the word effortless, and I fully agree with that word. It feels very effortless in the way that they've cast these shows. Yeah. I think there's still work to be done in terms of the writing staff. I think we've had predominantly Jon Favreau this season. I don't know if we have a ton of diversity on the writing staff in season 1, but so there's still progress to be made. But I think it's really important that, they really do seem to be making an effort to bring in more people, a more diverse group of people behind the camera. And think
to uplift them.
Yes. Yeah. And doing this Disney Gallery series and putting those people on camera and letting them talk about their love and their history of Star Wars, I think that's huge. And I hope that they continue with that too. Hopefully more in the style of season 1 of Disney Gallery, where we got like 8 episodes and not just the one that we got this time. But, yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. But Laura, you bring up an excellent point. There's something about seeing people of color speak about Star Wars that breaks that stigma that it's only for white people or only focused on white people. You're hearing people grab the general themes of the franchise, enjoy what the franchise is trying to show you. It is at its essence inclusivity, multiple species trying to fight this uniform evil. And that is important to highlight. Yes, obviously, always highlight the criticisms, call them out, because that seems to be sparking changes. It'd be different if Star Wars was just, no, we're going to do it this way, and that's that. They seem to be listening every single time they come out with something big, and so that's a positive in that they're willing to hear the fans, hear people, the writers and authors and journalists who are writing these expansive, intelligent, analytical explorations of what went wrong and what they could do better in the future. And they're implementing that as they go forward with all this. And you make a great point as well, Laura. We need to have more people of color on these writing staffs. And that is happening across the board now. It seems to almost be an explosion. So Star Wars needs to also get on board with all these shows that they've got coming out as well. And, don't forget, Marvel for 20-some movies didn't have that much diversity. So it's like they kind of got a little bit of a pass because the films overall were very well received. Now they're in essence listening as well as they go into this new phase, starting with what we got with WandaVision so far and what we're going to be getting with Eternals and what have you down the road. So it seems to be there is this these changes happening, and now we can start looking at it in a hopeful way, in a positive way, a new hope of what may be coming here in the Star Wars universe, I should think. Yes? No? Am I wrong on that, or what do you guys think?
Oh, I would agree with that.
Oh, definitely. And then have yeah. I know, like with Marvel, they had Victoria Alonso and Tran, who recently was the executive producer on Endgame.
Yeah.
And it also is a matter of them bringing up more creatives of color into these rooms. It's so important because, as a filmmaker, it seems like it's hard to break in, and a lot of it, as far as what I've learned through mentorships is about who and about making sure as you move through these spaces you're heard, and participate in a dialogue that is engaging. And I'm excited to see where that can lead various people. Like, like a lot of my peers are creatives who want to be on that path. Like Krystina Arielle, she's an incredible actress, and has this amazing opportunity to be on this show, and I'm so excited to see her on that, but also like actually in one of the movies. That'd be so cool.
Yeah. And maybe Star Wars coming out with that statement, you can certainly ding them for not coming out with it to protect Daisy or Rosemary or Kelly Marie or Boyega. At least they did it this time. So this can be an example going forward that they will do it again when anyone is attacked that is under their umbrella, that is a woman of color or a person of color, or a woman in general, when they come forward to host a show or to be a part of the universe, or to be an actor, actress, director, writer, producer, whatever involved with the Star Wars franchise. Hopefully this is a step them learning that they need to come out more forcefully and protect, because of how they were called out for not coming out for Boyega and Daisy Ridley and Kelly Marie Tran. I would think. I hope. Laura, any thoughts?
Let's hope so. No, I would certainly hope so. And I think most of what I saw on social media was very positive reinforcement of that message, of people replying and people retweeting it and being like, yes, this needs to be said. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for saying this. So I think overall it was a well-received message that did need to be said. It needed to be said, and I'm glad that they said it overall. I totally hear the criticism of it too. But I think one of the biggest things I have to personally always have to remember, and I think it's important for people to remember too, is that social media is such a small part of Star Wars fandom.
It's true.
It's such and even the people who are saying these horrific things about Krystina and about the diversity of Star Wars that we're seeing right now, they're an even smaller part of an already small part of the fandom. And I think keeping that perspective is important, but I am happy to see the number of people that are shutting that shit down too.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
Yeah.
Any final words on your end, Sabina, before we wrap up?
I definitely agree. And I think there are, many different ways that Star Wars can not only protect its cast, but also protect some of its like audience as well. I do think that supporting maybe talent who doesn't see everyone as like equal is something that's still like a conversation needs to be had.
That's fair.
And that is like, it's a part of it too, that's part of the other side of the coin of this specific moment as well, in continuing that dialogue and making sure everyone feels represented, and as far as on screen and also as a fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Having a different political point of view is not a negative. Having a political point of view that erases the rights of sections of people in your own country, that is a problem. And I think those are the things that hopefully at some point get addressed and get looked at, and there are decisions made, down the road. That is how you show full inclusivity. Inclusivity does not mean, we're going to take your opinions and we're going to, be okay with the hateful rhetoric you might be spewing. No, you have a right to spew it. We don't have a right to have it. We don't need to have it in our universe. And there can be a decision made at some point, and we'll see. And we'll see if that does happen, even though it looks kind of unlikely to happen. We shall see if it does. But either way, at the end of the day, this was a show to just talk about the journey of inclusivity for the Star Wars universe, and it kind of mirrors the country's journey as well, from when Star Wars first started to how much stronger female voices are, people of color's voices are, and being represented in media more and more, how Star Wars is reflecting that as well. So as much as you might want to ding it, and certainly there is enough evidence to ding it, you also have to create space to give it some credit as well for hearing and listening to the complaints and trying to make changes and adjustments and make it a more inclusive franchise. And I think we're on a hopeful path to something better down the road. So we shall see. All right, that's our episode here of The Jedi Way. I want to thank Sabrina Graves for being our guest today. Thank you so much, Sabina. Where can they find you? And please plug everything you got.
Yeah, no, thank y'all for having me on. I love talking Star Wars and talking Star Wars with like fellow fans from all walks of life. Yes, like when you said that, Laura, when you said that like you came in like with through Ahsoka, I'm just like so excited to like just even talk to you further about just that path of like going from there to like the old movies and like the new ones. So it's been such a pleasure to speak to you both. You could find me on Twitter at Sabina has no R, on Instagram at that lady Graves. I usually tweet out everything I do, which is pretty much all over the place right now. But one of the projects that I'm currently working on that I'm really excited to share with the world is a monthly retrospective podcast centering on the Halloween franchise that we started this month. So the first episode is up on John Carpenter's Halloween. And every month leading up to Halloween Kills, we will have a new episode. So we plan on hitting every movie on that way. And so if you want to see what's going on with that, definitely check out our Instagram at Halloween Never Dies _pod. And on Twitter, we are Halloween Never Dies, but I think the never is NVR. There's no E there, but I'll tweet it out, and yeah, excited to like as much love Star Wars, love horror as well. And if you're a fan of both those things, come talk to me.
There you go. And Laura, please, where can they find you everything got going on?
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is at shutup_Laura. The audio podcast that I host with my friend Alice is called Force Toast, a Star Wars happy hour. And our next episode 54, is going to be our 2-year anniversary of being a podcast.
Congrats!
Which is really exciting. Thank you.
Awesome.
So yeah, I'm pumped for that. And yes, again, thank you so much, Sabina, for joining us. This is a pleasure getting to talk to you today.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, absolutely. Follow everything these two ladies are doing. They're great, great talents. Please follow me as well if you'd like. At the Rocha Says on Twitter and on Instagram. And please subscribe to the channel down below. So much content coming here on the Outlaw Nation, and it's a joy to be able to bring it to you. Hopefully you enjoyed our conversation. Let us know what you thought in the comments section below. Let us know your feelings. Did you learn something from our conversation that you maybe not have known? Did you think we missed anything? Did you want to flesh out another point? Maybe present something for us to read and think about. Open to all of it. So please leave the comments down below. Don't forget to hit that like button as well. And most of all, share this episode on your social media. If your friends and family see you sharing it, it means that that you approve of this and you enjoy this. And maybe because they like your judgment on things or trust your judgment on things, they'll take a chance on the Jedi way. There are multiple Star Wars shows out there. We like to think we've created something unique here, and hopefully you all will feel that way as well and share it with your friends and family who are Star Wars lovers as well. All right, thanks everybody. We'll talk to you next time. Until then, practice social distancing, wear your mask, and Laura, what do we tell them?
Like and subscribe, and remember that your focus determines your reality.